we have to understand that this particular package is mostly focused on how to avert circumvention of sanctions.
The research conducted by many economists and lawyers shows that if the sanctions had been powerfully applied in 2014, it could have stopped and prevented such a full-scale war. Because as some experts testify, Russia continues using its shadow tanker fleet and revenues from the illegal black trade in oil and oil products make up a significant percentage of Russian budget revenues.
Hello and welcome to Ukraine in Flames, a special project by Ukraine Media Center and NGO Euro-Atlantic Course, and I'm your host, Miroslava Yaremkiv. The European Council adopted the 12th package of economic and individual restrictive measures due to Russia's aggressive war against Ukraine, the institution said in a statement. Sanctions should deal an additional blow to Russia's ability to wage war, targeting important sectors of the Russian economy and making it more difficult to circumvent sanctions. In today's episode, we're going to discuss the latest sanctions package, explore its potential impact on the Kremlin's 2024 plans, and delve into the essential tasks for effective sanctions. If you want to learn more about this subject, please continue watching this video and subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss our videos in the future. The EU introduces a ban on the direct or indirect import, purchase, or transfer of diamonds from Russia. The EU has also banned the re-export to Russia of sensitive goods and technologies used in Russian military systems. This applies in particularly to aviation goods and weapons. Rules for notifications of the sale of tankers to any third country are being implemented. This measure is aimed at transparency in the sale of tankers, which can be used to circumvent the ban on the purchase of Russian oil, oil products, or limit the price of oil of Russian origin. In order to further limit the circumvention of sanctions, the 12th package includes a ban on Russian citizens from owning, controlling, or holding any positions in the governing bodies of legal entities, organizations, or bodies that provide services of wallets, accounts, or storage of cryptocurrency assets to Russian citizens and residents. Chair of the Verkhovna Rada Committee on Ukraine's integration into the European Union, Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, will outline major points and key tasks from the latest package of sanctions.
The European Council has finally approved the 12th package of sanctions against Russian Federation on December 18th. I will not dwell much on the content of this package, but I will just outline several major things. First and foremost, it's critically important that the package has been actually passed. Notwithstanding the skepticism of some of the nations before it actually happened. That is confirming that the EU is continuously adhering to declared values. And one of those values, as we know, is consensus. So it is important that this package has also been approved by a unanimous vote, and nobody has left out for coffee. Secondly, we have to understand that this particular package is mostly focused on how to avert circumvention of sanctions, because unfortunately this is a serious problem, and we are seeing how the Russian Federation has been adjusting to this sanction policy and has been finding the ways how to get important funding, how to actually even reach out to buying the details for making additional weapons. Thirdly, even neutral Switzerland, which is also very important from my perspective, is by this decision of the European Council is joining to this restrictive measures on importing Russian steel and iron, and also to some of the measures on imports controls. I think this is basically equivalent to what is being done by the EU countries, and that has a significant further future impact. And last but not the least, with regard to this particular package, many political statements we hear right now in the EU, especially from some right populistic political figures, that sanctions are damaging the EU economy. We have to understand that this is a myth that is basically connected to political fights and political competition within the European nations. Because as we see, actually, the additional drivers for the European economy are the growing military production and also a lot of Ukrainian migrants who are at this particular moment seeking refuge across Europe, but at the same time already contributing to the development of the economies. And we have to understand that, yes, all these political statements are coming as a result of seeming protection of national businesses. Yes, it's very important, but we have to understand if this interests will prevail over values, we will never be able to win over autocracies and dictatorships in the on the global scene. So, if we really want to ensure that sanctions regime works, that means that we would have to have a clear goal for this sanction regime. And from my perspective, there are three major tasks, or at least one of these three major tasks that should be outlined as a possibility, as a task, as a goal for the sanctions to work. First, that is the punishment for the support of Russian aggressive behavior. Secondly, it could be sanctions to ensure that Russia cannot wage another war. And thirdly, the goal could be to defeat Russian Federation.
It also became known that due to the position of Slovakia and Hungary, there are no restrictions on Russia's nuclear energy in the new sanctions package. Slovakia apparently threatened to block the 12th package of sanctions if restrictions on the supply of nuclear fuel from the Russian Federation are not removed. Russia is the only supplier of this type of fuel to Slovakia. Unfortunately, the Russian nuclear industry has a huge influence in the world. Russia accounts for more than 45% of the world's uranium enrichment capacity, and it supplies nuclear fuel to the nuclear power plants of a number of countries. At the same time, experts say that the sanctions policy, although it does not give the results that Ukraine and its Western allies hoped for, nevertheless weakens the economy of the aggressor country, and it must be continued. Yaroslav Sydorovych from the European Cooperation Agency believes that decisions on some sanctions are to a large extent late. Let's hear what he has to say.
I congratulate you on Christmas and the New Year holidays, which are difficult to celebrate under fire from Russian missiles. And before talking about sanctions and their effectiveness, we should thank our armed forces and all citizens of Ukraine who are working for victory and steadfastly fighting for freedom and independence from the Russian aggressor. As to the sanctions, in particular the 12th sanctions package introduced by the European Union, first of all, we should thank them. Thank you for adopting these sanctions. Sanction pressure should continue to increase. However, the sanctions are to a large extent late. And if we talk about how such decisions have been made recently, the sanctions process has stopped and slowed down a lot. 179 days have passed since adoption and announcement of the 11th sanction package on June 23, on the eve of the summit in London, a big summit dedicated to Ukraine victory. The first six sanction packages related to Russia's full-scale invasion into the territory of Ukraine were adopted literally within 3 months of last year, whereas the adoption of each subsequent package was postponed for later. Besides, the sanctions are not as effective as they should have been. The hope that the sanctions will undermine the Russian economy does not have a serious basis, in the sense that Russia was seriously preparing for the war. The research conducted by many economists and lawyers shows that if the sanctions had been powerfully applied in 2014, it could have stopped and prevented such a full-scale war. The structure of central bank reserves shows that, for example, in 2014, the US Treasury bonds amounted to 150 billion in central bank reserves, whereas in 2022, before a full-scale invasion, they decreased down to 5 billion. That is, knowing that the United States will be tough enough, the Russians reduced their reserves in US dollars, but quadrupled them in euros, thinking that after all the European Union will not oppose as strongly as the United States. Since 2015, when the yuan became freely convertible, Russia began to place funds in yuan. In total, central bank reserves hit a record high of $650 billion before a full-scale invasion. And, in fact, their freezing in the West did not greatly affect the Russian economy. Russia's trade surplus is as large as it was before, and Russia sells more than it buys, and does not really need the currency accumulated in reserves to cover the trade deficit. There is such a phrase, a safe harbor for Russian money. That is, these funds, which are in the West, are to some extent protected today.
So the 12th EU sanctions package greatly eliminated previous loopholes that allowed the Russian Federation to circumvent restrictions in important sectors of the Russian economy. This should help reduce the economic basis of the Russian war in Ukraine and further weaken the Russian military machine. Public activist Ihor Stokoz will elaborate more on that.
On Monday, December 18, the Council of the European Union completed the process of adopting the 12th package of sanctions against the Russian Federation. First of all, it provides for a ban on direct and indirect imports, purchase, or transfer of diamonds from Russia. The sanctions list also stipulates that the EU exporters contractually prohibit re-export to Russia and the use of classified goods and technologies in Russia when agreements are concluded with third countries. The list of goods includes exports of chemicals, lithium batteries, thermostats, DC motors, and many other very important components and devices that Russia could use in its war against Ukraine. The sanctions also provide for additional restrictions on imports of cast iron, non-ferrous metal products, and many other types of Russian metal industry products, which will certainly reduce foreign exchange earnings. A separate issue is the fight against shadow trade in oil and oil products carried out by the Russian Federation, because as some experts testify, Russia continues using its shadow tanker fleet, and revenues from the illegal black trade in oil and oil products make up a significant percentage of Russian budget revenues. Some may say that sanctions do not work, but this is not quite true. For example, we can say that in October, November, and part of December alone, there were about 20, even more than 20 incidents in Russia's aviation industry. In other words, there were numerous accidents on Russian planes, which, due to sanctions, are unable to get parts and components necessary for engine service, etc. The biggest problems of Russian Aeroflot and aviation companies were engine failures and failures of brake systems. A lot of planes had to return to the airport after taking off to avoid a crash. So we have to understand that the 12th sanction package isn't final. It does not completely block all those illegal flows going to Russia. Therefore, most likely the European community, the world community, and the civilized world will have to verify, diversify these measures, strengthen them at some points, monitor, and really act in such a way as to make it impossible or a lot more difficult for Russia to wage the war against Ukraine.
You've been watching a special project by Ukraine Media Center and Euro-Atlantic course dedicated to the Russian-Ukrainian war, Ukraine in Flames. In the description under this video, you can find information on how you can help Ukraine fight Russian aggression. If you find our work useful, please like and share this video. Slava Ukraini!